Hello again, gamers. Welcome back to the Board Game Captain. I'm the Board Game Captain, and today I'm going to be reviewing and talking about the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Game Mastery Guide. But before we get into the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Game Mastery Guide, I do want to say that if you would like to get some cool gamer gear, like the I Drink and I Game shirt, it's what I do that I'm wearing today, as well as possibly the Filler Up and Let's Roll mug that I am drinking out of today, as well as many other mugs and t-shirts. They are all available on our merch store over on Teespring. There's a link in the description down below. In addition, if you're in a position to and you would like to help support the channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description down below, where joining, depending on what level you join, gives you access to early release videos, behind the scenes videos, as well as the ability to request review and tutorial videos for your favorite classic games, and also gives you access to patron-only giveaways. So, both in the link in the description down below. So, to start off with my review of the Pathfinder Game Mastery Guide, I would like to thank Paizo for sending me this review copy of the Pathfinder Game Mastery Guide to read and use in my games of Pathfinder, and of course to do content with, like this video right here. So, thank you, Paizo. Now, the Pathfinder Game Mastery Guide, which was right on the front cover, it was designed by Logan Bonner and Mark Seifter, I believe is how you pronounce their names. So I'm going to show them right here to the camera in case I'm mispronouncing them. And let's just see inside. We've got additional writing and extra designers. So many people, as usual with Paizo's development, were involved in the creation of this book. Too many to name. They have a whole team over there constantly working on all their stuff. So I'm going to start off by reading you the back of the book, which, the blurb usually gives you a little bit of a good idea what to expect when buying one of these books. Make your game your own. As the game master of a Pathfinder campaign, you're the architect of your players' adventures. A rewarding but sometimes challenging responsibility. With this book, your job just got a whole lot easier. Whether you're building your own monsters and adventures, looking for new systems to play out cinematic chases or tense infiltrations, or simply want to speed up your game with scores of NPCs ready for action, the Game Mastery Guide has you covered. All right, so we're going to have a look through and see what actually is inside of this book. And I'm going to talk about, who should buy this book, who I would recommend it to. And of course, at the end of this, I'm going to rate it and review it, just like I always do. So when you open up the Pathfinder Game Mastery Guide, you have the standard first couple of things you usually see in a Pathfinder book. Oh, before I get into that, I lately have been forgetting, and I don't want to forget these things. I got to talk about the production. The thing is, I have this feeling that as I see more and more Paizo books, how amazingly produced they are can become a thing that I can gloss over, because it starts to become, almost like the new status quo. But it really isn't, because they're one of the best companies when it comes to production of their books. Their stuff is super high quality, and I do want to draw attention to that. So this is an old school thread binding book, nice glossy hardcover, very sturdy, full color, glossy pages, lots of great artwork. This is an amazingly produced book, so I do want to draw attention to that. First, it is super awesome, like all their books, like you come to expect from all Paizo hardcover books. The production on this is, it's out of the park. It's fantastic. And still, like I say, probably, I would say that Paizo's production is consistently in top tier. There's only about 3 to 5 RPG companies that are in that top tier, and they're always one of them. Their hardcover books are just fantastically produced. Okay, so now let's get on to what's in here. So the first thing you got, after you pass by the table of contents and whatnot, the first section is the introduction. So the introduction is a bit, of an introduction. It's telling you what to expect from this book. It's just a couple pages long. It's got some nice bits of artwork in here. As I'm talking about this stuff, I'm going to be showing some artwork up on the screen so you guys can see what I'm talking about. But once you pass the introduction, you get into the game mastery basics. Now this, if you are a long-time role player, and especially if you are a long-time game master, this is a section you have seen in Game Master or Game Mastery guides all over the place, because this is something that is incredibly important, is lots of advice and instruction on how to be a Game Master. This includes some interesting optional ideas as well as just, general ideas that everyone should follow for running a game or a campaign. So some of the interesting ideas in here is they go over the whole idea of a session zero, which is kind of a newer concept where you actually role play out sort of the backstory of your characters before they actually get into it. It's an interesting idea. I haven't tried it yet myself. I like how it could help players really get into characters as their character to play out their backstory as a session zero. I might try it for my next campaign. And there's a lot of other interesting ideas also. One of the things I really like in regard to advice to keep you as a new GM from falling into pitfalls that we have all seen time and time again is they specifically draw attention to the incredible pitfall that I've seen so many game masters fall into, is the creation of what is usually known as a GMPC. Now, a GMPC is an NPC that the game master comes to identify as their player character, hence the game master player character, and they'll have them go on the adventures with the players, and then they will interfere with the players solving the missions inevitably and solve them on their own. This is a terrible idea. No one should ever do this, but it happens again and again and again, especially when you are a game master who yourself wants to one day be a player. It's a very easy pitfall to fall into, that you make a character that you identify with. And there's a whole paragraph in here telling you, don't do that. Don't do that. And they do a lot of those, but that was one that really drew my attention because I had a long-running game with a game master who ran a GM PC, and eventually it just became too much, and it's what dissolved the group, because after a while their GM PC was actually solving all of the adventures and we weren't, and of course that's not fun. That's not fun for anybody. So the next, as you continue on through here, there's lots of explanation on how to run adventures, ideas on how to adjudicate different sorts of actions, how to quickly come up with ad hoc bonuses and penalties, whether or not to use maps or miniatures in different scenarios, what challenges are they good for, what are they not, tons of stuff. In addition, extra stuff for things like mounted combat, aerial combat, underwater combat, yes please. Then you've got social encounters and run all sorts of different ways to run exploration, at different kinds of things that people can do when running exploration versus just combat. So here's the thing. This is the sort of chapter that is, one, highly necessary, and two, something that if you are very experienced, you will have read many times before. So if you are a more experienced game master, you're going to probably just skim through this and look to see what bits are new and interesting and different. Whereas, especially because the bits on mounted combat and aerial combat and underwater combat are great. But if you're an experienced game master, a lot of the basic advice, like not doing a GMPC, might be sort of things that you're like, oh, everybody knows that. I don't need to focus in on that. But if you're a new game master, this section is fantastic for you. And then they as it goes, it kind of gets more and more advanced. Like they start going into how to work with your players on retraining if they want to get rid of skills they already learned and go down a different road and learn new skills, things like that. All sorts of ways on adjudicating rules, problem solving, special circumstances, dealing with rarity in your adventuring party, how to construct a full campaign and what kind of structures to go with, different sorts of rewards other than just experience and treasure. So it goes over all that kind of thing. And then you move on to chapter 2. Now, chapter 2 is tools, and this is my favorite chapter in this book. So you may realize shortly that I'm gushing over this chapter, and this is why. I love this chapter. This is the chapter with all the coolest, things that I can't wait to get my hands on as a game master. So what is the tools chapter? The tools chapter is exactly what it sounds like. It is a chapter that is a big toolbox. It is filled with all sorts of, optional things that you can do to design your own creatures, helping to design NPCs from scratch, building hazards, designing your own magical items, all sorts of interesting quirks you can give to magical items, making intelligent items, all these lots of cool systems for doing these sort of things. So let's get into it. So the first section you have is building creatures. Now, for building creatures, they go over actually within this, and it's a fairly large section with a lot of depth to it. They have some interesting ideas for easy redesigns, like if you're making some sort of elemental creature and maybe there's a creature that fits the bill of what you would want to make, but for a different element, they talk about easy just sort of swapping the elements, swapping the attacks, swapping the vulnerabilities and resistances and immunities to the correct elements, and how you can do that with certain creatures to make new varieties of existing ones and not need really any level adjustment. But then they also go into amazing amounts of detail about how you could, from scratch, building a brand new creature that they never thought of, design your monster from the ground up. And there's some cool bits of art in here for different sorts of creatures that I kind of like. I really like that they give, when designing a section with all the different types of creatures, that then gives you ideas on what their senses are like, what kind of languages they speak, what are their weaknesses, what are their resistances, etc. So for instance, you want to make a plant monster, let's say. So it says, well, plant monsters, their traits, plants without minds usually will have the mindless trait, but that's specifically without minds. Senses, they usually have low light vision. Immunities, if they're mindless, they're usually immune to mental. And weaknesses, they are sometimes weak to fire. And again, none of these are, all-encompassing. They're like usually, often, etc. So you can adjust it as you see fit, as it makes sense for your type of monster. But it's interesting to give you the general rules for plants or demons or rakshasa or funguses or fire creatures, to know what is normal for those types of creatures. And then you can adjust therein. And I like that they did that. After that, they've got building hazards. And hazards could be traps. They could be natural hazards. They could be supernatural. There's all sorts of interesting ideas in here on how to build them. And then after how to build them, they have a huge list of new sample hazards. And this is great because in addition to building your own, it's another just bunch of options that you can throw in while adventuring, while exploring the wilderness, while exploring dungeons, that you might run into, say, the Titanic flytrap, one of my personal favorites of all the new ones in here, just because I love Venus flytraps, and they're a theme I usually like to work with often when they are available in the games. After you get through that, you get to the building items section. Now, this is another one that is incredibly in-depth, and building magic items should be in-depth, and there are lots of cool things to absorb in here. I like that, well, one, I like that they came up with their own way to build magic items, but they added some really interesting stuff in here. There's a big table to roll random bizarre quirks for your magic item, or you could select one. It is your choice. And then the next section is on making intelligent items. So this is like a magic item that is also sort of an NPC. Be careful, again, don't make it a GMPC, but these are cool. I especially like the singing sword, which is a sword that just, the only way it will ever communicate with you is through song, but then it can also cast spells. And my favorite thing about it is it totally reminds me of the singing sword from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which I get a kick out of. It was a really funny scene, so I like that a lot. And if it were to show up in my one of my games, I think I would totally describe it as looking like the sword from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Then you have cursed items. Now, cursed items are phenomenal. I think these are so cool because these are items with very unique and interesting specific curses. It may take the players a little time to figure out that they are cursed, but once they figure out that they're cursed, there are ways to turn a lot of these to their advantage. So some of them, though, if they're not able to be turned to their advantage, they could be the focus of a major story arc to try to get rid of it or destroy it. So a couple examples. They put in the monkey's paw. I love the old classic story of the monkey's paw. It's a fantastic pop culture reference that they have it in here. And this is a horrifying thing that is difficult, to, if not impossible, to get rid of. You could become a whole story arc. It basically will grant your wishes, but in horrible ways, just like the old story. Now, on the other end, something that you could turn into an advantage is the Bag of Weasels. This is basically a cursed version of the Bag of Holding. So you're going to put stuff in here, but then every time you go to pull something out, there's a chance it's going to turn it into a weasel. And I think this might be a reference to the TV show Warehouse 13, where there was an item that if you could wish for things, but if it couldn't give you what you wanted, it would just give you a weasel. This might be a joke reference to that. I'm not positive, but it seems like it is, which I get a kick out of. I love pop culture references in these games. And the thing about the Bag of Weasels is this is one where once you realize what it is and what it does, could be turned to your advantage in some way, either for some reason if you wanted to make lots of weasels, or trick an opponent to putting something very powerful in the bag in hopes that it would then be turned into a weasel permanently. Now, the sample items under cursed items are then followed up by specific item curses. So if you're building your own items, there are lots of curses in here for you to choose from for other types of items that are not listed here. Also really cool. Next, we have a section on relics. Now, relics in Pathfinder are not body parts of saints. Relics are these very interesting magical items that level up with you. So this is a bit of an optional rule. They're very powerful items, but they only get powerful as you get powerful. They start out fairly low level with a couple of abilities, and as you level up, you get to choose new abilities for them, and there are tons. And I do mean tons of abilities in here, and I could see a very interesting campaign being played out where like the players are the chosen ones to save the world, a la any, JRPG video game of all time, and each one of them starts with a really cool relic that as they level up, they get to level up the relic. It could be a really cool option for a high power game where the signature item of each player is almost as important as the player character's abilities and stats themselves. And that could be really interesting. Next, we have artifacts. Now, artifacts are super rare, super powerful magic items. They are a bit of a mixed bag for me, though, because these, when I say super high and super powerful, every one of these are above level 20 in their power levels. And as an example, if you've ever played any of the older editions of Dungeons & Dragons, you're familiar with the Deck of Many Things. The Deck of Many Things has been the bane of many game masters who read it, thought it sounded cool, put it into a game, and had it ruin their game. It's in here. This is one I do not recommend you ever use. I think it's in here mainly for nostalgia effect. Otherwise, this is one that a lot of the effects, it's kind of like a tarot card deck, and you draw cards from it. Some of the effects are really good, some of them are really bad, but a lot of the bad ones, unfortunately, are bad without being fun, because they're things like making you go down a level or change alignment, and I don't think those sort of things are very fun for a more modern game like Pathfinder. I think it's more in here for the nostalgia effect, or maybe you might have it in here to have a whole quest line of trying to destroy it while also avoiding the temptation of using it. Now that could be interesting, and I could go with that, but overall as an item, this is one of those items that I think, unless you're maybe playing a very lighthearted kind of frivolous sort of campaign, this could be the sort of thing that really messes up your campaign if you introduce it, because some of the effects can be a bit game breaking or be severely unfun for your players. There are other items in here that are much more interesting, including I'm a big fan of the Orb of Dragonkind, which there's one for each type of dragon, and while holding it, it makes you immune to lots of the dragon's abilities. It's incredibly powerful. Also, I love there's this weapon called see if I can pronounce it. Seraphim Thitial, I believe is how it's pronounced. It is a magical sword that has all sorts of amazing effects, and one of the coolest effects, which I really like about it, is it senses what your favorite variety of sword is and will shapeshift into that variety of sword for you. It is naturally a bastard sword, but if you are really into falchions, it'll become a falchion. And that is really awesome, and that very much seems like it might be a pop culture reference to the Soul Calibur from the Soul Calibur games, because the Soul Calibur always changed into the type of weapon that the person wielding it was most familiar with, and preferred. So that is really awesome. Once we move past that, we've got a big bunch of tables for gems and art objects. And this is just a really nice resource for if you want to better describe specifically items of art that are in loot and are being stolen, and figure out how much they're worth, etc. That's all in here now. Really, really cool. And the next section after that is affliction. So this is a bunch of new diseases. Now, in addition to some, fictional diseases, as well as fictional curses and things like that, there's some real world diseases in here. So for instance, for some fictional ones, you got things like bog rot and crimson ooze and a bunch of various curses, curse of slumber, Slayer's Haunt, etc. But then for real world ones, you've got malaria, you've got scarlet fever, you've got tetanus, you've got tuberculosis, leprosy. These are all real things. So the reason I like the inclusion of these is that you can explain to your players that some creature is infected with goblin pox, which of course is a real disease from the main book, and my players have run into it already in my game, but they don't really know what goblin pox is. It doesn't really have a base understanding before they've run into it, like how severe is it, how dangerous is it, how virulent is it. But if you tell them that there's an outbreak of the bubonic plague in this region, that has an immediate visceral reaction. Your players know that's incredibly dangerous. With medieval level technology and without antibiotics, they know that it is an incredibly dangerous thing to go into an area where there is an outbreak of bubonic plague. And that's why I like the inclusion of real world diseases. Next, we have drugs. Now, if you're playing a very adult and serious game, the inclusion of drugs and dealing with themes like addiction can be very interesting. It's not fully my cup of tea. I have done it a little bit in more cyberpunk style games. I'm not sure I would be super into it in like a standard fantasy game, but it's in there as an option. So if you want to do it, you've got it available. And that's the best thing about this, is there's just so many options. Next, we have building your own campaign setting. It starts with building a world. Moving on, you get to build civilizations. You can come up with religions and pantheons for your civilizations. Then you get down to building specific nations and political structures, individual settlements, towns, cities, ports, etc. They even have stat blocks for the different sizes. And then my favorite part of this, building your own planes. Now, this is really cool. There's lots of different ideas in here for elements you can give to your planes. Especially, I'm a big fan of giving the element of air to a plane, because I love playing in games with floating islands and flying airships and such. I always love that. That's a great concept. I've played multiple RPGs in worlds like that and always think it's fantastic. Then after that, you have the canon planes. So you've got the negative energy plane, the positive energy plane, the plane of air, the plane of earth, the plane of fire, the plane of water, the astral plane, the ethereal plane, first world, shadow plane, Abaddon, the abyss, the axis, the boneyard, Elysium, heaven, hell, the maelstrom, nirvana, the dimension of time, particularly awesome one, by the way. I really enjoyed reading about the dimension of time. And the Dreamlands. These two have some nice mythos connections, which is really cool. Then there's an explanation on demi-planes. And you can build all sorts of awesome planes to your heart's content, because you can come up with your own system of planes for your own cosmology and ignore the ones in the books if you so want. And I love that that tool is there. I'm not planning to use it for my current campaign, but maybe down the road or maybe for a future one. I think it is really awesome. Next, we have the next chapter, chapter 3, Subsystems. Now, this is a ton, and I do mean a ton, of optional rules is what this is. They're new optional rule systems to use in different sorts of challenges and encounters, starting with victory points, which the whole thing with victory points is they're usable to track your goal towards a larger, more epic or more time-consuming goal. So maybe, for instance, instead of just doing something quick like a single fight or just, unlocking a door with picks or convincing someone to give you a bit of information, maybe instead you're orchestrating a war, or you're building up resistance to a coming invasion, or you're planning a Ocean's 11 style heist, or you are doing any of these things where all of the planning and all of the events slowly gain you victory points towards the goal that you are striving towards. You can even use this in a much smaller scale when maybe you're at a dinner party and you're trying to convince this wealthy noble to get information out of you, and a simple persuasion or intimidation is not going to work, and you can't just grab him and beat it out of him or anything. You have to slowly win his trust, slowly get him to your side of whatever the rift is, and get him to willingly give you the information. And these can be really interesting. They also give ideas for using these sort of systems for doing research or playing out courtroom dramas, chases, all sorts of these subsystems which use the basic victory point system. These are really cool. These are the sort of thing where you're not going to use them all the time. You're going to use them once in a while, especially when you want to make a specific duel or infiltration or battle seem incredibly epic and incredibly important, and that's why they're there. Another one of the subsystems in here is the Hexploration subsystem. So that's so you can turn Pathfinder into a more sandboxy kind of game, something more like Forbidden Lands, where you can just wander around and run into adventures and let the players kind of dictate the pace and everything of how everything is going in the campaign. After that, you have an area that I am very much in love with. It is the vehicles area, because this gives you rules for fighting during a chariot race or doing battles with ship boarding actions, being able to ram with vehicles. Also, like I said before, airships. I love airships. Airships are so great. There are some items in here I wish they'd given a bit more description to. There's something in here called a steam giant, which I imagine is some sort of steam-powered automaton. I'm imagining it like the steam-powered metal monstrosity at the gates of the Goblin City in Labyrinth, but there's not a huge amount of description to it. I think that's what it is, though, by my imagination, and that is pretty cool. I love that. Again, is another thing that reminds me of a pop culture reference. And then we go into another section called Variant Rules. Now, I do think this section is a bit oddly titled, mainly because Variant Rules seems mostly like what I've been reading this entire time in the other sections. But the idea here is these are not optional rules. These are literally variants of rules that are in the main book, which is why this section is Variant Rules, and this is the Variant Real Rules section. So this is a lot of ideas on changing how you get abilities, changing how you get skills, being able to start as level 0 characters. This was an interesting idea. Level 0 characters are much weaker than level 1 characters. It lets you basically play out the history that makes you become a hero. Also, interestingly enough, deep backgrounds, allowing a session 0 where your characters actually play out their backgrounds and gain their abilities through play. Also a really cool idea. There's some very interesting ideas in here. Again, it is another toolbox with lots of options. If you don't like how the skill system works in the main book, here's another option. Here's a completely different skill advancement system. Then we have the NPC gallery. Now, this is the last major section of the book, and this section is filled with lots of ready-to-use NPCs for all sorts of occasions. And they are grouped by what type of NPC they are. So first you have courtiers. So you have people who would show up in a noble court. So you've got a noble, a palace guard, advisor, spy. Then you have criminals. You've got grave robbers, bandits, ruffians, and charlatans, burglars, and fences, and assassins. Then you have devotees. So here we are with religious type characters. You have an acolyte of Nethys, a prophet, a zealot of Asmodeus, priest of Pharasma. Then you have the downtrodden, beggars, commoners, urchins, prisoners. Then you have explorers. Some of these are cool, like NPC characters to help you out when you're in an unknown land. Torchbearers, chroniclers, guides, tomb raiders, poachers. These are this next group is foresters. You have poachers, trackers, hunters. Then you have healers. These are great NPCs to run into when your characters need help back at town after contracting a terrible disease or being horribly wounded. You've got apothecaries, physicians, surgeons, and plague doctors. Then you've got standard laborers. You have servants, dockhands, farmers, miners, grave diggers. Then you've got a bunch of magistrates, people in legal professions, judges, tax collectors, harbor masters, wardens. Then you have mercenaries, bodyguards, mages for hires, bounty hunters, monster hunters. You have mystics. There are adepts. There are harrow readers, cultists. You have false priests, necromancers, cult leaders, demonologists. There are officers. You've got barristers, guards, archer sentries, jailers, watch officers, captain of the guards, executioners. There are performers like dancers, acrobats, troubadours, beast tamers. There's a lot of NPCs in here. Publicans, you've got servers, barkeeps, innkeepers, drunkards. Now, all of these, and this is an interesting thing, at the beginning of this chapter, they have quick rules these are all by default human, but quick rules to turn them into the other heritages. Again, then you have scholars, librarians, teachers, astronomers, sages, seafarers, navigators, pirates, bosuns, ship captains, tradespeople. You've got apprentices, merchants, smiths, guild masters, villains. I want to know how this is different from the criminals, mind you. But you have saboteurs, masterminds, anti-paladins, despots, reckless scientists, gang leaders. And that's it for the NPC gallery. Okay, so these are fantastic. Each one has a piece of artwork, and there are tons of them. Again, they all default to human. Human should be the most common of the ancestries in at least in Golarion. If you're playing in your own world, that might be a little bit different. But again, there are instructions at the beginning of that section to turn those NPCs into any of the common ancestries, which is very useful. And then at the back, we have an appendix and, of course, the open gaming license page, which is in, the back of all of the Pathfinder books, and then a advertisement for the Lost Omens World Guide, which I have already reviewed. Feel free to check that out if you're interested. Really cool guide to the world. Spoiler alert, I liked it. Okay. What is this? Who should buy it? So, this is 100% a toolbox. Once you get past the first two sections, the introduction and then the second section being the kind of advice to game masters known as the Game Mastery Basics. Once you get past that, everything else is tools in the toolbox. There's things where you're going to be like, I like this or I don't like this. I'm going to use this or I'm not going to use this. Or maybe I'm going to use this later. I'm just going to stick a little mental pin in it and remember it's there and may come back to it in a future game whenever I want to do a game about airships. Yeah, I like doing games about airships. Okay, so number one, who should buy this? Game masters. Or if you're planning to game master and you're looking for good ideas for how to structure a campaign. If you're only a player and you never game master and you have no intention of game mastering, you don't need this book. This is not for you. If you're a game master, you're thinking about game mastering, you want some advice for building a campaign, this book is great. This is tons of options, tons of ideas, tons of advice, and that is really cool. So, if you're in the situation where you are currently game mastering or thinking about game mastering, and especially once you get past the beginnings of game mastering, the rest of this book is tons of tools to help you use to make your games feel less all the same, to have more interesting challenges that are different from the standard rules. Maybe you've played several games of Pathfinder and you want to use some variant rules and try different ways of gaining experience and gaining skills. That's what those later sections are for. And then that first big section is for beginning game masters. So if you're a beginning game master, this book is fantastic for you because it starts off with stuff that is really good for while you're learning to game master, and then as you go through the book, it literally gets more complicated and more advanced as the sections go on, so you can read a section as you go, as you advance as a game master and as your campaign advances as it goes on, and slowly try out more and more optional rules, more and more varieties of things that are in here to use. So yeah, this is pretty great. There's tons of useful stuff in here. There's some things where it's like, okay, there's a few things where I'm like, I'm never going to use these. For instance, as a quick example, I will never use the deck of many things in one of my games. I am very much not a fan of that item in any of its incarnations. I think it is game ruining. But some of those other amazingly cool magic items are fantastic, and I love the fact they have the ability to make your own magic items. That's incredibly cool. I also really like the pop culture references I already talked about, and I really like the ability to make your own monsters, make your own magic items, have intelligent items as a NPC and an item at the same time. Lots of cool ideas in here. The relics are really cool. I think they'd be really interesting to build a whole campaign around. The variant rules are a little hit or miss with me. Some of them I think are interesting. I really like the whole starting as level 0 thing. I think that's something I might try. Whereas, some of the variant systems, I'm like, I like the way they are enough in the main book. But again, that's the point. I doubt anyone will ever play a game where they use every bit of optional or variant rule in here. It's very unlikely. So you take what you want and you leave the rest. And that's really what this book is about. So now it's time to rate it. I've talked enough about what I like. And it's a lot. This book is really cool. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 stars. This is a really cool resource. Specifically, again, for game masters. If you're game mastering Pathfinder, or you're playing in Pathfinder, but you're thinking of game mastering the next campaign, and you'd like some cool ideas for world building and some cool ideas for different ideas. Maybe while playing there were some rules systems that you weren't a huge fan of, and you want some alternate ways to play those sort of actions in the game. Get yourself the Game Mastery Guide. It is really cool. It is a beautifully produced hardcover book. It retails in the US for $50. So all these books, because of how nicely they're produced, are a little pricey. So that is something to keep in mind. But if you've already started collecting the game books and you're already game mastering and you're looking for stuff to mix up your game, this is $50 well spent. This is going to give you tons of material, tons of ideas, tons of cool systems to help you make your own material and keep it balanced within the game. Hence, the making of the monsters, the making of the NPCs, the making of the magic items. They are fantastic. That's my favorite part of this book, is all of that stuff in there. And also the making of the various planes. I like that a lot too. I like making your own worlds. So there you have it. If you have checked out the Game Mastery Guide, let me know in the comments down below what you thought of it. And if you enjoyed this review of this role-playing game book and you'd like to see me do more like it, be sure to give it a like, share it on all forms of social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Captain. That's Captain spelled with a K on YouTube. And until next time, game on.